Imagine uh, surviving a horrific physical assault, only to slowly realize that your attacker didn't just physically hurt you.
Right.
They actually treated your nervous system like a biological USB drive, like quietly uploading their own memories, their own instructions, and their own survival protocols directly into your brain.
It is terrifying when you really think about it.
It really is. And when you sit down to watch a highly stylized supernatural teen show, that is not the formula you expect. You generally expect a clean threshold, right?
Yeah, exactly. The classic hero's journey.
Exactly. A hero experiences an inciting incident, endures some growing pains, and is initiated into a larger, empowering, magical destiny. But today, we're asking you to step way outside that traditional journey. We're looking past the glossy surface of the hit series Teen Wolf to examine something deeply unsettling.
We are looking at a storyline where female supernatural awakening is a coerced event, rooted entirely in physical and informational assault. Furthermore, the resulting trauma symptoms are continually misread by society as madness.
Placing her in a long, troubling Gothic tradition of doubted women.
Exactly. She does eventually transform that trauma into a formidable, life-saving interpretive authority.
But the narrative refuses to fully untangle her empowerment from the violence of its origin.
No, it doesn't.
It leaves us with an ethically complex, deeply gendered portrayal of supernatural initiation that refuses to offer easy comfort.
Yeah, we are focusing specifically on Lydia Martin's storyline in Season 2. We're treating this narrative as part of a long and honestly often troubling literary history where women are made to bear, transmit, or embody male designs at great personal cost.
So the central claim grounding our entire conversation today is that Lydia's supernatural awakening is in no way a chosen destiny.
Yeah.
It's not. It is a coerced initiation produced through assault, psychic invasion, and trauma.
And to map out how literature and visual narrative have historically represented women as violated mediums and doubted knowers, our primary interpretive text today is Paul's research from Teen Wolf News.
Yet Paul's analysis really forms the backbone of this deep dive.
It does, and we will synthesize Paul's analysis with established show canon from the Teen Wolf Wiki. We're also grounding the mythological aspects in some historical folklore texts. So specifically, we're looking at Britannica, the Encyclopedia of Death and the Human Experience, and the New Hibernia Review.
Awesome. So if we want to understand the deeply gendered narrative structure of Lydia's awakening, we really have to start with the exact physical mechanics of her violation, right?
Right, the attack itself.
Yeah, in the Season 1 episode Formality, the primary antagonist, Peter Hale, attacks and bites Lydia on the lacrosse field. And for years, a really common interpretation among the audience was that Peter was just simply manipulating Lydia from afar throughout the second season.
Like treating her like a puppet on a string.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Paul's research pushes back on that.
Yeah, Paul argues that using the language of external control is just far too blunt. It actually minimizes the specific horror of what the show portrays. Peter isn't just steering her from a distance.
No, he's not.
He implants a directive structure into her. Paul's analysis categorizes this as an informational invasion.
I mean, let's break down that phrase because it sounds clinical, right? Almost like a cybersecurity term.
It really does.
But when you look at how the supernatural rules operate within the show canon, it becomes horrifyingly literal. We have to look at how werewolf biology actually functions in this universe.
Yeah, because in show canon, there is a specific memory transference mechanism. The werewolves don't simply use their claws and teeth to inflict physical damage. Those physical weapons literally act as conduits for data.
It's basically a biological data transfer. And we see the mechanics of this quite clearly in another episode, Magic Bullet.
Oh, right, with Derek and Jackson.
Exactly. So Derek Hale is suffering from wolfsbane poisoning. His body is completely shutting down. And in a moment of sheer physical panic, his claws accidentally punctured Jackson's neck. But because of that specific physical puncture, Derek's own memories lead directly into Jackson's mind. It plays out like an involuntary data leak.
And the show then escalates that accidental concept to something highly premeditated. Because in the episode Co-Captain, Peter Hale intentionally demonstrates this exact same ability.
He does it to Scott, right?
Exactly. He sinks his claws into the back of Scott's neck specifically to force a neural link, to flood Scott's mind with his own memories and his own perspective.
So, following Paul's analysis, if we take that established canon logic and apply it back to the attack on the lacrosse field in Formality, the nature of Peter's spite is entirely recontextualized.
It changes everything.
It really does. He isn't just trying to kill her, and he isn't trying to turn her into a werewolf. He uses that exact biological mechanism to implant his own memories, his instructions, and his resurrection protocols directly into Lydia.
He anticipates his own death and essentially treats her body as an external hard drive to store his backup plan. He injects foreign code into her nervous system.
Which explicitly strips this awakening of any illusion of consent.
Completely.
It frames the entire supernatural initiation as male survival, parasitizing a female body. It completely removes the possibility of viewing her entry into this magical world as, a voluntary threshold crossing.
Yeah, trauma and physical violation become the strict necessary conditions of her awakening.
Yeah.
Without that violent act of psychic and bodily invasion, Peter's resurrection cannot happen. And her supernatural abilities are not catalyzed in this specific way without it. The narrative actively binds female access to supernatural knowledge to an invasive breach of bodily autonomy.
But the result of this invasive programming isn't a clean upload. It's not as if she wakes up knowing exactly what happened or what she's supposed to do.
No, not at all.
The malware, essentially, glitches out her physical reality. And this shifts our analysis from the physical violation into the realm of institutional gaslighting.
Which is so hard to watch.
It is brutal to watch. If you recall the aftermath we see in Season 2, she is sleepwalking naked into the woods, she is losing hours to fugue states, she's doing involuntary writing.
And constantly hallucinating Peter everywhere she goes.
Exactly.
And Paul's research insists that we cannot flatten these behaviors into simple mystery box clues for the audience to solve.
Right, they aren't just breadcrumbs for the plot.
Exactly. These symptoms map perfectly onto the textbook afterlife of violation. They are literal manifestations of dissociation and intrusive return.
Let's clarify those terms for anyone unfamiliar with the psychology of trauma. Dissociation, in this context, means her mind is detaching from reality as a defense mechanism.
Right, which explains the lost time.
Yeah, that's why she experiences those fugue states where she loses time entirely. And intrusive return means that because her brain couldn't process the horrific bite when it happened, the trauma is essentially forcing its way back into her conscious mind when she's awake.
So her visions of Peter are visual representations of her trauma actively directing her actions. She isn't just seeing ghosts. Her brain is trying to process the literal data transfer that was forced into her.
And this leads to perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire arc, which is how the society around her reacts to those symptoms. Because Lydia's mind is furiously trying to decode the malware that Peter installed. She is processing actual, literal, supernatural data.
But her credibility completely collapses under the weight of her trauma symptoms.
Exactly. Nobody believes her.
And within the Gothic tradition, there is a long history of the doubted or madwoman. In these historical narratives, a female character frequently senses a real lurking threat, or she possesses genuine knowledge about the world.
Like the trope of the woman locked in the attic.
Yes. Because her knowledge arrives outside of the accepted, rational patriarchal order, society labels her hysterical. Her knowledge is immediately pathologized.
The tragedy of this double bind is that her parents, her doctors, and even her peers treat her as a liability rather than a victim of an assault. The show essentially converts woman's suffering into plot machinery.
It really does. The narrative structure demands her isolation to maintain the suspense. By framing her trauma as madness, the show forces the audience to watch this teenage girl's mind seemingly break.
While simultaneously letting us, the viewers, understand that she is carrying a truth no one else can see.
Exactly.
So the conversion of her trauma into madness allows the male characters to dismiss her agency entirely. It isolates her further, which conveniently allows Peter's programming to run its course uninterrupted.
Right. He needs her isolated.
Yeah. The tragedy is that she isn't actually losing her mind. She is receiving signals for which neither she nor the society around her possesses the right vocabulary yet.
And this pathologizing becomes even more glaring when we contrast the show's violent manifestation of her powers with actual historical folklore. If we look at the historical texts, Britannica, the Encyclopedia of Death and the Human Experience, and the new Hibernia Review, we see an immense gender disparity in how power is historically acquired and expressed.
Historically, the Banshee is an almost exclusively female figure rooted in Irish mythology. She is a liminal entity.
Meaning she operates on the thresholds between life and death. She exists in a transitional space.
Right. And traditional folklore associates the Banshee deeply with keening. And keening was a traditional, communal vocalized form of grief and mourning performed by women in Ireland.
So the mythological Banshee serves as a passive death warning. She warns and she mourns. She is a figure of sorrow, not a figure of violence. She does not fight.
But a show takes that passive, grieving mythology and weaponizes it completely.
They translate a folkloric omen of communal mourning into an involuntary, supersonic scream that shatters glass.
Her historical role as a harbinger of death manifests in the narrative as a trance-like compulsion that literally drags Lydia to gruesome murder scenes, completely unaware of how she got there.
Which is terrifying.
Right. And a feminist literary reading suggests we have to compare Lydia's coerced initiation with the male supernatural arcs on the show to truly understand the underlying narrative values at play here.
Yeah, if we look at male characters in the canon, like Scott McCall or Derek Hale, their storylines are certainly filled with conflict and danger. However, they are fundamentally centered on mastery, control, and physical strength.
Yeah, their arcs are about managing aggression, learning to fight, and, building a pack hierarchy. Their power is active.
They get training montages.
Exactly. They get to punch things and assert physical dominance over their environment. But Lydia's power is distinctly punitive. It relies entirely on unwanted receptivity, extreme vulnerability, and a relentless, non-consensual exposure to death.
She is stripped of her armor, whereas the male characters are granted it.
And we also have to highlight the origin of that power. Because in a lot of modern fantasy, female magic is framed as a birthright. It is passed down from a grandmother or a coven or a community of women. It's a shared heritage.
But here, the catalyst is hurled at her by a violent male antagonist. This reflects a pervasive cultural pattern where women's relation to knowledge is routed almost exclusively through suffering and disbelief. The underlying narrative logic implies that her ordinary sovereignty over her own body and mind must be violently damaged before she is deemed a worthy vessel for this specific, death-oriented knowledge. She has to be broken to become useful.
Which brings us to the aesthetics of how that suffering is presented to you, the viewer. Because we are talking about a highly stylized, glossy, teen drama.
Right, the presentation matters.
The lighting is beautiful, the actors are beautiful, the music is perfectly curated. We really have to ask if the show's aesthetic intentionally forces the audience to confront the ugly reality of her empowerment, or if the production value merely glosses over the violence.
Her entire horrific ordeal, the terrifying fugue states, the social isolation, the institutional gaslighting, is revealed to be nothing more than Peter's backup contingency. Her body and mind were thoroughly used to facilitate his return.
What we are looking for in analyzing a text like this is the refusal of a clean separation between empowerment and victimization.
Because Paul's research points out that Lydia does eventually claim a kind of agency. If we look ahead to later episodes, like The Girl Who Knew Too Much, the show eventually reveals her as a character with formidable, life-saving interpretive authority.
She becomes the one who decodes the mysteries. She saves lives.
But we cannot ignore that her power remains inextricably linked to the initial assault on the lacrosse field. Her empowerment is not a clean gift.
No. It is more akin to a terrifying kidnapping scenario.
Exactly. Every single time she uses her voice, every time she interprets a supernatural sign, she is speaking the language Peter Hale forced into her nervous system through sheer trauma. And the narrative never fully reduces her to passivity, which is critical to acknowledge here. She acts, she interprets, she resists. But her empowerment is not pure emancipation. Power gained through trauma is still trauma-shaped power.
Yeah, the series asks us to watch a violently invaded subject become increasingly literate in the supernatural signs moving through her. But a feminist literary reading ensures we never forget that Peter's physical and psychic invasion was the necessary catalyst.